Telstra's recent network outage sparking concerns about reputational damage, reflecting a stark irony after the company capitalised on competitors' failures. So coming up this hour, Telstra faces scrutiny after a major network outage and the Australian government cracking down on influencers who are promoting gambling. To break it all down, we're joined by Darren Woolley from Trinity P3 in Sydney. Great to see you. The images of people having to sleep the night near train platforms because the Telstra network, which is meant to be a guaranteed, reliable, expensive national network, failed. What do you think will be the fallout from this for Telstra's reputation?
Well, Aaron, it's interesting, isn't it? Because Telstra is now a long line of major telcos in this country that have had outages. We first had Optus and then Vodafone and now Telstra. And as we've seen, there's been major reputational damage, but they're not necessarily a lot of financial and business impact. I mean, there's a bit of a shift here and there, but Telstra's big exposure on this one is they've spent so much time telling us how reliable they are and how ipso facto, how unreliable their competitors are. So they're probably a bit more exposed.
Yes, it's a reason why many of us are with Telstra or fly Qantas. The idea is that in a crisis, they will be able to handle things. When that doesn't happen, what are the lessons that a company like Telstra and the rest of us as consumers need to learn?
Well, look, before we even get to the lessons of the crisis, in marketing, we talk about the 4 Ps. And most people think about marketing as promotion or advertising. But in this case, we've had a product failure. That's one of the major Ps. So, the lesson that Telstra needs to learn is make sure if you're going to tell people you're a reliable source, make it reliable. And I know everyone says, oh, software is difficult, but you can't go out talking about reliability and then let people down. You raise expectations, you raise your fees, because let's be honest, Telstra on pricing charges a premium for most of these services compared to their competitors. And now they've been exposed. The lesson for them is get your product right and live up to your promises.
Is it possible though? I mean, everything goes down, even the TICKER stream sometimes goes down, usually at the best time in the middle of the night. And the thing is that technology is inherently unreliable, particularly digital technology, particularly for a company like Telstra that has to manage satellites and towers and phone lines and the whole lot of it as well. So is the issue building up an expectation of invincibility that just can't be matched?
Look, Aaron, I'd absolutely agree with you if telcos were like, a video stream or a news business. There's not necessarily lives on the line. And what we see every time is this focus on the 000 emergency line and the number of either lives lost or potentially lives lost. If you're offering and responsible for providing a product where lives are on the line, you would think you'd have redundancy systems, backup systems and other things to be able to respond much faster when these go down. I think we have to measure this. The fact that we rely so much on telco infrastructure, because as you said, train systems in Victoria were affected, transactions, financial.
The news was just unbelievable watching it. I sat there on the couch watching the 6 p.m. news as coverage was coming through, thinking about it from a journalist and from a brand perspective, and it was so bad. I mean, it wasn't just the CEO being away at the time, which is fair enough, take a break. You can't always be there. But it was the pictures of people waiting for buses and the bus queue just going on and people being told you're going to need to stay at the train station overnight, and the idea that the ramifications of this go for so long, and then hearing from the train operator say, I would have thought there were redundancies in place here. I mean, that's how they market themselves, that there are redundancies in place. Do you think for Telstra that brand trust is irreparable?
Look, I think ultimately people will have to make a choice around, which telco they use. At this stage, our 3 major telcos have all had outages in the last few years. So what we have to realise is that, really this oligopoly that Australia faces in telcos is not necessarily as reliable as we're all led to believe. And either we need to start looking for backups or we need to just accept the fact that they are not reliable. I think the big
Yeah.
thing that's going to hit Telstra is pricing. They have been a premium pricing because they've been saying they're offering a premium service. It'll be interesting to see whether that premium pricing holds up in the face of such a fundamental failure to deliver the quality of service that they justify that pricing on.
Yes, I know quite a few people who have worked for Telstra in the marketing and communications role, and so I was texting them as I was watching the news saying, and these are people who haven't been around for a long time, I need to preface that, but I said, how would you handle this? And the answer was quit. Run. Because the idea of how you can actually repair an image when you have spent so long. I mean, you drive past billboards of Telstra that say, you know, we're everywhere, we're always on, we're reliable. As you say, this has been the marketing spiel for them for some time. I always love, years ago, there was a full-page ad and a big marketing campaign from Telstra of a young Indigenous girl somewhere in the outback holding a phone on a rock, and the Daily Telegraph said she's looking for signal, which kind of destroyed the whole concept of what they were trying to achieve. What can they do, just the final question on this topic, to try and repair their image?
Look, I think they've started doing that. They've been more open and transparent. They've been a bit faster to get information to consumers, though as we've seen on social media, some consumers are still really angry about this. I think what they need to do is to make some undertakings to consumers, pay compensation where it's due, where people have had material losses, and really commit to having a great product at a good price, and then continue to live up to the expectations that they've created. But if this happens again and again across our telco system, I think Elon Musk will start seeing a bigger market share with his satellite internet.
Yeah, it's a very good point, and obviously a lot of investors in the major telcos are watching very closely what happens in space. Now, the Australian government is tightening regulations on influencers and also rising concerns over gambling promotion, a complex shift in the strategy to manage digital content creators' influence. This is interesting because the government watching very closely what happens on television, but now they're turning their attention to influencers as well, who I guess are kind of getting around it. Is that correct?
Yeah, and we've discussed this previously, Aaron.
Well, that's the end of the topic.
No, but sorry, we've discussed the fact that the media industry is changing. I mean, TICKER itself is operating in many ways outside the traditional broadcast media. And so the government last year invited influencers and content creators, many of them journalists themselves, to come in because they to the budget lockdown sessions, which traditionally were for credentialed journalists from media organisations, but they opened that up. And the reason they did that is more and more Australians are getting their news, younger Australians particularly, but more Australians getting their news from outside the traditional broadcast and digital media. And so what we're seeing here is
so much trust has been lost with traditional journalists, right? And so if they see someone that they like and they've built trust with, and it's on their phone and it's a closer, more intimate connection, those influencer partnerships can really stand out. So what are the risks that come from that, though?
Well, in that largely it's been unregulated. And what we saw this week was ACMA, after the passing of the gambling bill, sent out guidance to all influencers and all content creators that there are regulations in place and there are expectations for them to also abide by this and not be promoting gambling unless it's, one, very clear that it's a promotional piece that they're being paid for, and two, that they need to be within these guidelines. And I think this is a huge milestone for the whole content creator influencer category, because it's now become a mainstream media channel. It has for marketers and advertisers, and it's clearly been identified by the government. They want to reach these audiences. They want to be able to push their messages out through them, but they've also acknowledged that advertisers are going to be doing this for commercial reasons too. And so they're starting to set some guidelines. And I think this is showing how that category is maturing.
All right, Darren Woolley, TICKER's top marketing influencer. Thanks for joining us on TICKER.
Thanks, Aaron.